Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today let's get dirty with some textures. What am I talking about? Well, let's turn something that has no texture, like this, into something that has texture, like this. So I want to introduce you to two techniques and two tools today. The two techniques are using texture as a layer that glues your drum loops together. And the second technique is how to use textures to create entirely new, very expressive atonal musical voices. And the two tools I want to introduce you to today are the envelope follower and the complex LFO. These tools can be found in many different forms in many different plugins and software packages, but today I'm going to be using the Cableguys Shaperbox and Noiseshaper specifically for this purposes. This video is also sponsored by Cableguys, so thank you very much for supporting what I'm doing here on the channel. In particular, this video will also look at the Noiseshaper, which is an extension for the Shaperbox that has just launched from Cableguys. But anyway, like I said, two techniques, two tools. Let's get into it. Boom, 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 boom. Before we go any further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and go have a look at the courses and classes on our website on underdog.brussels. Support me on Patreon to see more free content like this, and leave a comment below to tell me how much you liked the video, if at all. Hopefully. Let's go. All right, let's talk about the tools that we're going to use today. The first one that I want to introduce you to is the envelope follower. What the heck is an envelope follower? Well, you know how in a synthesizer you have a thing called envelopes, and there are these curves that determine how something evolves from its minimum to its maximum, back to its minimum over time. It's like just a curve that goes, whoa, and you can determine if it goes up fast or if it goes up slow or whatever, right? And then you can use that envelope as a way of modulating other things. Modulation just means changing, right? That's all that modulation means. And you say, okay, I want this curve to change how my filter opens or closes, or I want this curve to change how bright or dark or how aggressive or how soft my sound is over time. That's just what an envelope does, right? And so what an envelope follower does is it listens to an audio signal that comes in, and it just measures the loudness of the audio signal and uses that as the modulation source. It just says, okay, the signal is loud. Now we're going to give out a high modulation source. The signal is quiet. We're going to give a quiet modulation source, like a low modulation source. Then you can use that, the curve that's generated from this envelope follower, as a way to modulate any other parameter. Let me show you this in practice. I'll make myself a super boring drum loop as an example for us to work on. So in drums, I'm just going to take myself, let's say, an 808 or even a 707 core kit. And I'll just make myself a 1-bar drum loop. Why not? So I'll select the area, Control Shift or Command Shift M, and then I'm going to click here, hop, make myself the most boring loop that I can think of, Control L to loop that, and snare, snare, and let's go. So let's put an envelope follower on this. What does that mean? Well, like I said, I'll use the external tool called Shaperbox for this, just to demonstrate all these concepts. And when you put Shaperbox on something, you get all these possible options of effects. And today, the one that we're going to use is the one called Noise. Now, what this Noise plugin does is it has an envelope follower in it that's listening to the signal that's coming in, and then applies that envelope that it generates to the volume of white noise. If that sounds abstract, let me show you in practice. Okay, do you see what's happening here? Every time that my drum hits, the signal gets louder, and then that loudness is then used to tell a white noise signal to also get loud at the same time, so that now there is a white noise signal that is following our drum beat and is mixed in with our drum beat. But I can hit noise only, and now you can see this thing is following the drum beat that I had just created. So what we've done now is we've created a secondary layer based on our drum beat, something that follows the contour of the drum beat but is not actually containing any of the original sounds of the drum beat. This might remind you a little bit of the technique that we used in our shadow grooves and shadow harmony video as well, where we make derivative layers from a source sound that has some movement in it. And so there are a couple of parameters here that we can mess with to shape this. For instance, the attack, hold, and release, we can make it close slower, for instance, or in a more snappy way. There we go. We can also do the opposite. We can do, instead of making it louder with every drum hit, we can make it quieter with every drum hit, creating something like a sidechain effect using this duck function like this. See that? And if you make it longer, it really becomes this kind of a swell. Something that you can put in very quietly in between your drum loops, potentially, to give it a little bit of a noise floor that reacts to the original material. But anyway, let's stick with the follow instead of the ducking. And let's blend something like this in with our drum loop to start giving it a little bit of glue and texture. And the beautiful thing about this plugin is that you're not just limited to white noise. You also have all these other types of sound. Kind of like, these are all like found sound or Foley sound or whatever you want to call these. These are like field recording type sounds that have some character and attitude in them. So this might save you a lot of time going out of Ableton trying to find those sounds and bringing them in just to be able to give a little bit of grit to your sounds. So let's have a look at some of these scraping sounds, for instance. See that and how it's changing over time even? And we can then choose to shape the EQ of this a little bit. For instance, to only sit in the high mids, something like this. And then we can blend this in with the original signal by deactivating the noise only. Here we go, now we've got some extra layer to our sound. And we can, of course, make it really subtle, like this. Or really exaggerated. One of the things that I find with this is that sometimes less is more, right? So often while you're designing something, it's nice to have it up loud, but then after a while you only want it to be a subtle layer in the background, so then you just trim it all the way down. All the way down to here or something. And there you go, that's the envelope follower and how it can be used to create a layer of glue to surround your drum group. And so the other thing that I wanted to teach you about today was the complex LFO. This is a completely separate concept from the envelope follower, but later on we can combine the two for powerful effect. So what the complex LFO is nothing more than an LFO that's complex. So let's just refresh our memory on what an LFO is. An LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and that just means a signal that goes up and down, but slow enough that it's not audible. And we actually use it to modulate some other parameter. Like I said, modulation is just changing another parameter over time, right? And so it's a signal that goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And we use that to open and close a filter gradually, for instance, or to make a sound brighter, darker, more aggressive, less aggressive over time to suit our track, to give movement and dynamic interest to our track. And typically an LFO has a couple of standard shapes. There's the sine wave that it can be, goes up and down. There's a sawtooth wave, which starts high and then goes down, or the other way around, it ramps up. There's the square wave, and there's a couple of other standard shapes. But the cool thing about a plugin like this is that it offers you an LFO where you can draw in any complex shape that you like. Let me deactivate the envelope and instead just use the LFO. Here, only the noise. Now, this noise is completely flat. And in fact, let me just switch to white noise. Yeah, completely flat, right? No movement at all. So what we can do is we can start drawing in shapes. For instance, there. Look at this. It starts high and goes down over the length of 1 bar. Easy enough, right? But then you realize that in fact you can draw in rhythms. Okay, so what does that mean for us? Well, we can get really complex really quickly. Look at this. Now we've created a white noise groove. Yeah, cool. We've just created a white noise groove that we could layer in to our track, for instance, just by disabling the noise only. Ah, interesting. However, this is not really responding to the groove now. It's just an extra layer that we've added on top of it. So to make it respond back to the groove, we combine the concept of complex LFO and of envelope follower. And so here I turn back on the envelope follower, and here we go. So you see that the rhythm of the LFO and the rhythm of the envelope follower are combining to create something that does respond to the original source material. And then when we blend it, look at this. And let's go back to a more interesting sound. Liquid sounds. Seashells. They've got some really weird stuff in there. All right. And again, you can shape it all over here. And now you can see that we've used envelope followers and complex LFOs to create derivative layers that have turned this very, very cookie cutter, sort of boring static loop into something that has some dimension, some texture. This is a challenge that I came up against very often when I was producing, especially at the beginning, that everything that I made in Ableton was too static, too clean, too boring, because Ableton is a very high precision instrument. And if you know exactly what you want to do, you have the tools to do it. But there's not a lot of chaos in there. There's not a lot of happy accidents. You have to kind of know exactly what you're doing. And combining two tools like this, the complex LFO and the envelope follower, creates an awful lot of happy accidents. That's a super fun playground for sound design. Especially when you go beyond what we just did, because this was creating glue for a drum track, but you can create entirely new and interesting, rich musical voices that you can combine with each other. And one of the spectacular things about it is that it's all atonal. You know, in music composition, often I would say things get simplified to you have the drums and then you have the synthesizers, and you have to use that as your musical palette, right? And you use the drums for the rhythm and the synthesizers for anything that's melodic to create hooks and leads and things like this. However, you don't have to go down that route. There is sort of a middle way, which you could describe as atonal music. And there's a lot of very fun, intricate sound design there. I want to show you what I did for the example at the start here. For the example at the start, I used a very simple core kit like this, which is the 808 bass drum, like the simplest thing you could possibly imagine in Ableton, right? So if you don't know how to do anything in Ableton, that's the first thing I teach people, is to take an 808 core kit and program 1, 2, 3, 4 kick drums. Now you're starting to compose, right? So this is the level 1, day 1 sound. There we go. And then I opened up Shaperbox and I created this just from that one element. And so it's two different units of this Shaperbox. One is the noise, just creating a little bit of a derivative rhythm on it, and then adding, in addition to the noise, the drive. And so the drive does the same thing. It also has an envelope follower and a complex LFO, but instead of how much noise is being added, it says how much are we going to overdrive this. And that creates this, for me, super warm, dense texture that I'm really, really attracted to. I could listen to this for days, to be honest. In my headphones with a lot of sub bass, you might not get the full experience on your laptop, but you know, some of you are probably listening on headphones, and that's good. And then, added to that, I created the simplest little hi-hat line that you can imagine. Something like this. See that? Just two little hi-hats. Tick, 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 tick. And so, with the Shaperbox there, I used 3 units. I used the noise to do this. Okay, something that kind of pulsates and comes and goes. Then, I added some bit crushing. This bit crushing unit, by the way, has super powerful controls. Even though they're super small at the top, they are really, really powerful. And so you can get these kind of really interesting resampling textures. It's very, very nice. You can put the filter on there, put some jitter on there. It's just like Ableton's Redux plugin or D16's Decimort, which is one of my favorite plugins of all time. But this can do pretty much that and modify it over time, which is very, very fun. And then we can add some drive to it as well. to create a little accent on the downbeat every now and then. Nice. And then together with the core kit, now suddenly we're creating atonal music. See that? It's purely about rhythm, this. Rhythm and texture. Cool. Then I decided I would take myself the basic standard wavetable patch and add in a bass line like this, just this. I mean, that doesn't sound like a bass line yet, but I knew that I was going to put this through the noise shaper and start making derivative layers of it, and suddenly it would become a bass line. So I'll turn it on, show you a little bit the different layers. If you listen to that element, there we go. We've just got ourselves simple noise. We don't even use the LFO, just the envelope, and I drastically low pass it. I low pass it very low so that then I know that I can put some drive on it later, like crushing and drive, that's going to add a lot of harmonics on the top. There we go. Yeah, once we put the drive on, that's when it comes to its right. It becomes a lot louder as well. And then after it's overdriven, then we filter it back down a little bit with some rhythmical filtering here. So you see how many different types of envelopes and LFOs that these have in them, and they all can interact to create this kind of patchwork of rhythmical interest. So together with the other layers, cool. And then in terms of instrumentation, I figured there was still quite a lot of space in this composition, and this bass could use a kind of a response to its call. You know, call and response is a compositional technique where you have one element play something, then another element responds to it. So I figured I would make something that just plays a single note every 2 bars like this, and it goes a little something like this. Ah, cool. And all that is, behind the scenes, is, again, a synthesizer just playing a really ugly note, like this. And then it goes into this shaper box, and the shaper box just turns it into noise. And then I band pass the noise by low passing and high passing it at a certain frequency. And that is literally all it is. So the idea is that they play off one another. So when I play both of them, you can see them both here. Call and response, one responds to the other. And then together with the drum groove. Now, when composing this, one of the challenges that I came up against was that these sounds can very quickly become too dominant and take up way too many frequencies. So in many cases, you have to be quite ruthless in what you cut away to create space in the mix so that your ear doesn't get fatigued, so you don't get overwhelmed. So you need to really harshly cut a lot of frequencies, and don't be afraid of that, because otherwise all these elements are going to be competing for frequencies and it gets very fatiguing. We could layer in this last element that we just created. I think it might be nice. So let me bring down the volume and layer it in. Here, let's solo the sound on this, solo the noise. Yeah, cool. And let's add, you know what? Let's add a rhythmic drive to it. Not bad. Oh, I like this. Let me tweak some of the parameters. That's pretty cool. Let's layer it in now. Hey, there we go. Funky. All right, and there you have it. The envelope follower and the complex LFO mapped to some noise textures and some other effects suddenly allow us to start composing with texture and create this intricate, detailed, multi-dimensional sound sculptures that don't rely on synthesizer sounds or tonal sounds at all. It's all pure shuffle and noise. Thanks again to Cableguys for sponsoring this video. It was a great opportunity to introduce you to these concepts. Come show us on the Discord channel what you did with these techniques. Until next time, be good to one another, stay producing, and take care. Bye-bye.